So let's say you treated SIBO and your breath test goes negative, but you still have symptoms. Or you got better, but then you started declining again. And the second thing is what happened to me. After struggling with such severe GI issues for so long, I have made it my mission to cram as much info into my brain as humanly possible so I can pay it forward. In this video, you'll learn why SIFO should not be ignored in patients with SIBO and what to do about it. SIFO stands for small intestinal fungal overgrowth. You might have heard people say I have Candida, which refers to the type of yeast that can overgrow in the digestive tract. I personally prefer the term SIFO because it tells you exactly where that overgrowth is, the small intestine, as opposed to in other parts of the body like the mouth, the vagina, or in your butthole, or colon. That's the accurate way. There's no really good test to diagnose SIFO other than an upper endoscopy, which is invasive. Some people look at stool when testing for SIBO or SIFO, but we know from studies done on the microbiome of the small intestine that stool and the small intestine microbiome really have no correlation. It's like getting a mammogram done of your right boob and declaring the left boob cancer-free. Science. So that's why you need to do a breath test and not a stool test for SIBO, and then the same logic applies for SIFO. You can't do a stool test, and a breath test would be good, but you can't do that either because I asked Dr. Rezai on my last appointment with him what gas yeast produce, and they produced carbon dioxide. So with a breath test, you wouldn't be able to differentiate between the breath that we breathe out and the Candida's breath, farts, gases that it produces, whatever you want to call it. So that means that most SIFO is diagnosed clinically based on your signs and symptoms. Unfortunately, a lot of those signs and symptoms overlap with SIBO, like nausea, belching, bloating, diarrhea, and farting. Has there been enough bathroom humor for you yet? Where are we on the Richter scale of bathroom humor? There are two things that we know make people more susceptible to SIFO, and they are two things that often SIBO patients have: slow motility of the small intestine and being treated with antibiotics. I have made a thorough video on how SIBO slows the small intestine and how that relates to anti-vinculin antibodies. But to put it very simply, SIBO causes some people to create antibodies against a nerve protein in the gut, and this slows the small intestinal motility. We need this motility in order to keep the small intestine free from food debris so that microbes can't ferment it and overgrow. And then the other thing that can make someone more susceptible to SIFO is taking antibiotics, and whether those antibiotics be herbal or pharmaceutical, that's how SIBO's treated. And it makes sense that once you wipe out the bacteria that compete with the fungus for food debris, that allows the fungus to take over, so to speak. And this may be what happened to me. I first had methane and hydrogen SIBO that I treated accidentally. Don't ask, long story, doesn't matter. But I felt a lot better. Unfortunately, I didn't immediately get on a prokinetic to help with motility and prevent relapse, so I developed hydrogen sulfide SIBO. And the way that this works is that the microbes that produce methane and the microbes that produce hydrogen compete for the same food resource. And this makes sense because the microbes that produce methane and the microbes that produce hydrogen sulfide compete for the same food resource in the form of hydrogen. Knock out one competitor or predator and the other one moves in. So then I successfully treated my hydrogen sulfide SIBO as evidenced by my Trio Smart breath test. Unfortunately, I couldn't get on a prokinetic due to my reactivities, so I stayed on a low maintenance dose of rifaximin to prevent relapse. And while this isn't the best way to prevent SIBO relapse, given the complexity and severity of my case, this was better than having a SIBO relapse. Didn't want my small intestine to fall off the wagon. But then I started to get extremely fatigued after eating, and my bloating started to return, and I started to have reactions to foods that I have never, ever reacted to. So these symptoms, plus my known risk factors for developing SIFO, so the slow motility and having been treated with antibiotics, it made sense to empirically treat me for SIFO, which is what Dr. Rabar, my doctor, has been insisting that I do. And on my past 3 appointments, he keeps showing me this picture on Zoom, and I couldn't find the picture, and he didn't really tell me where it was from. And finally, I found it, and I read the article, so here it is up on screen. I'm one of those patients that has to convince myself that something is real and significant before I start treating, so I'm glad I found that article and I used that as a jumping off point. And this is what I've learned. So Candida is found in 70% of healthy adults in their GI tract, so that's normal, just the overgrowth isn't. So when it is found in the small bowel, it should be in very low abundance. But what about in people with GI symptoms? So Dr. Satish Rao and his colleague tested 150 people with GI symptoms, and they tested them for SIBO, SIFO, or both, and found that 63% had one of those. So of those with overgrowth, 40% had SIBO, 26% had SIFO, and 34% had both. So this shows us that SIFO is not uncommon in those with GI symptoms. Candida species have at least 9 different forms in the human body, but don't worry, we're not going to go over all 9, just 8. Sarcasm. The yeast and hyphal form are the 2 best known forms. So the yeast form is single-celled, and the hyphae form are thin, tube-shaped, and look like segments of a garden hose. And yes, I did just say hyphae. I'm taking a poll. Am I more white or more annoying? Scientists used to think that the yeast form was the commensal or non-pathogenic form, and the hyphae form was the pathogenic form, but actually both forms can be pathogenic in the body. The hyphae form does have specific traits that makes it more able to cause disease. Hyphae, unlike yeast, can actually make human cells take up the hyphae so that the hyphae are then inside, and then the hyphae can cause damage to the human cell. And this causes a more pro-inflammatory response in the body. In other words, the hyphae like to get hyphae. And these 2 forms are essential in creating biofilm, which is a slimy substance that microorganisms create to protect themselves from the host's immune system and enhance their survival. Fun fact, Candida make traditional biofilm, but they also make sexual biofilm, where they, get it on. I'm not joking, it's actually called sexual biofilm. And these sexual biofilms are less resistant to the host's immune system and antimicrobials, and this makes sense because they're busy getting it on. And Candida can switch their form depending on a lot of factors like nutrient availability, even the host's body temperature, and other cues that the host's immune system gives out. It's actually been shown that inflammatory chemicals released by human cells, including mast cells, can induce inflammation in the GI tract and increase permeability, which the Candida then capitalize on and disseminate throughout the body. So how is SIFO treated? Quick reminder, I'm not a doctor, so this isn't freaking medical advice, so don't sue me. And I'm just gonna give you a brief overview. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me do a whole video on SIFO treatment so I can give you more not medical advice. In an interview in 2016, Dr. Satish Rao says he likes to treat SIFO with fluconazole because of its ability to reach the small intestine. He likes to prescribe 100 milligrams once a day for 3 weeks, which he says is usually sufficient, and if it's not sufficient, he'll do another round or he might use a different agent like itraconazole. Dr. Rao is less enthusiastic about nystatin for SIFO because he's not quite sure it really gets to the small intestine as well, and he uses it more for infections of the mouth and the esophagus. But he said that when patients are allergic to fluconazole, he has used nystatin and has seen some success with it. So I'm currently on a very low dose of nystatin and I'm going to titrate up as tolerated. The pros of nystatin is that it stays in the lumen, which means very little, if any, escapes from the GI tract, and it doesn't have to be metabolized by your liver. For nystatin, Dr. Rezai told me that he uses 1 million units 4 times a day, while I've heard Dr. Kangura on podcasts say he uses 1 million units 3 times a day. Dr. Rabar has also suggested monolaurin as a possibility for me, and Dr. Kangura uses this as well. Monolaurin is a supplement that's derived from coconut oil and it has lauric acid. They both have said that monolaurin has both antifungal and anti-biofilm properties. And as I said earlier in this video, Candida does form biofilm, so addressing the biofilm may be a really important part for some patients in succeeding in treatment. A common and effective treatment for biofilm is N-acetylcysteine or NAC, and this was essential in getting my hydrogen sulfide SIBO into remission. Thank you, Rabar. Some practitioners use caprylic acid, which is also derived from coconut oil, and there are supplements of this. Some other options include allicin extract, which is derived from garlic, and undisilenic acid, which is derived from castor oil, but don't just drink castor oil because that's toxic. But also don't do anything I tell you to do because I'm not a doctor. Just like SIFO, SIBO can cause almost any digestive symptom you can think of. Watch this video here in which I explain how SIBO can cause such a wide array of symptoms. I just fell down and hit my butt crack on the chair. And I scared Piper because I was holding her and I didn't mean to almost kill us. Or did I? Click it now, fellow health-seeking humans!